Me and Chester will come to you. Welcome back, friend. Whew. Well, not a whole lot of work done on Chateau de Sangre this week, but that's all right. It's got a kind of rustic charm all on its own, doesn't it? But hey, for the price of a little house paint, did you know you can listen to me, Geoff, and Paul J. McSorley make complete asses of ourselves? It's true. There's 18 episodes of the Drew, Geoff, and Paul show up on my Patreon. And I'd love to have y'all join us. We have a pretty good time on there, laughing our asses off mostly, at each other. That's right, Chester. Just head to patreon.com/drewblood. Meanwhile, let's head on inside, friend. Hey, don't worry. I'll leave my sales hat at the door. Oh yeah, I'd advise you to avoid the bathroom for a while. The ghost fella left us an upper decker. Classy as always, you prick. Ooh, it's the Crimson Hour here at my new weekend abode, so we better get started. 'Cause when that last lick of light fades away, it's gonna be you, me, and whatever's waiting in these walls for the lights to go out. Our story tonight comes courtesy of A.W. Mason by way of Thalox Books. This one's a selection from his excellent collection, A Haunt of Travels, which you can find at thaloxbooks.com. In it, we join a group of people who find themselves mysteriously transported to a strange prison-like reality after pumping gas at various locations. So, without further delay, from author A.W. Mason, I give you Sunshine and Bullets. Once again, bullets rained down from the sky in pounding waves as Alton and the other survivors huddled toward the middle of the lead shed. The shed itself seemed bulletproof mostly, and the safest place to shelter when the brass storms came rolling in. The plinkin roared like large raindrops hammering a tin roof. Only rain didn't leave tiny scraps of metal scattered across the sand and dirt like sharp little stars. "Is everybody all right?" a large man with a matted beard asked after the storm subsided. Another man, tucked away in a corner, held tight to his shoulder. Little rivers of red liquid oozed between his fingers. The lead shed, although by far the safest refuge from the storms, was still susceptible to ricochets. Dusty beams of light flooded in through the shed's north-facing structural defects. Alton let his hand fall through the brightness, watching it dance over his fingers. The light was real enough. So were the occasional bullet wounds, but Alton's mind often drifted back, trying to remember how he had gotten to this strange place. How he had ended up here, where the sky never changed its stained clay color. This place with structures that looked like they belonged in a dilapidated Old West movie set. This place that poured down bullets instead of rain. It took Alton a while to get adjusted, if you could call it that, to the oddities of his new surroundings. He couldn't recall precisely, but he must have been in this bizarre new world for close to a month now. Some of the group had been there going on a year, although no one had a solid concept of time when the sun seemed to set whenever it felt like it, and even when it did, the sky didn't change much. 2 others had arrived since Alton, and already one of them had gone missing. With any luck, that man found a way back into the reality Alton so long ago departed from. Counting the missing man, the current population came to 25. "All's clear," yelled Hanson. Hanson fancied himself the watchman. Alton noticed that each member of the group took some sort of role within the community, and after a time had consigned himself to the labor force. Aside from the lead shed, their little village consisted of lodging to the north and commercial dwellings to the east. 2 of the buildings housed food supplies and water stores that replenished themselves every week by some phantom force. A smattering of other buildings contained old clothing and medical supplies as if strategically put there for the group to use. Perhaps they were. Toward the edge of the township stood 3 additional buildings, boarded up to the point of no entry. No one knew what they were for, and regardless, they had enough to sustain life, even if it was without the creature comforts of plumbing and electricity. The only thing that any of them could remember before waking up in this old Hollywood-like shanty town was pumping gas. Some said they were at the Gas and Go off County Road 7 in South Carolina. Some claimed they were at a 76 station in Pennsylvania. Yet somehow they all ended up here. Herman, Hanson's twin brother, walked up beside Alton and struck a match to light his cigarette. 2 of them left, he said, looking into the crumpled pack. He took in a long drag. The smoke from his exhale cut through the perpetually auburn-colored sky. Too bad they didn't find any of these with the food here. Say, Alton, you ever feel like we're being watched? Alton surveyed the ashes from the cigarette as they floated down and landed on his boots. So, you've seen them too? He asked. Herman shifted his weight before taking a final puff, tapping the cigarette out on the building next to him. You mean those silver things that go flying around? Oh yeah, I've seen them. Didn't want to bring it up around the group. I probably already seemed crazy, still smoking these things and all, he said, and motioned to his almost empty pack. What do you think they are? Drones, maybe? Who in the hell would be watching us? Why? Herman looked down and frowned, pushing the dull sand around with his foot. A gust of wind blew through, taking with it the pile of sand he had created. Well, I would say the government, maybe, but I can't even give them that much credit. The things that happen here, how we all remember getting here, they just don't seem natural. I still have to think we got to be here for a reason, though. Otherwise, I might lose my sanity. What's left of it, anyway. Alton sighed and considered his friend's theory. It almost seemed like a taboo subject, bringing up reasons or ideas regarding their living situation. To Alton, it was an odd notion that the group had been here so long yet talked so little of why. He raised his head and met Herman's stare. Well, mine's not much better, if you're willing to hear me out, Alton said. Herman nodded at him to continue. Alton cleared his throat. Perhaps it's alien. Why not, right? I don't know any technologies, human or otherwise, that can explain the things going on here. Or how the people just randomly show up and randomly disappear. And of course you know what happens when you try to walk on out of here. Herman nodded. He did know indeed. A few days after arriving, he decided to leave camp and ended up walking and walking and walking until he came upon the same place where he had started. He left a second time undeterred in a different direction and ended up at the camp again. He wasn't the only one who had tried. Similar stories from several others circulated throughout the camp. I wonder if we aren't the only ones to have noticed those drones or whatever they are. Think we ought to bring it up tonight at the food rations assembly? Sure would beat listening to Jeremiah recite by heart the gospel according to Luke again when the meeting ends, Herman said, laughing. I bet you others have seen those flying things. Maybe they'll have some ideas on what they are if we can get anyone to talk. Before Alton or Herman had a chance to gather their thoughts and prepare for the food rations meeting, another of the group had gone missing. Toby, the second best set of eyes around camp, had disappeared. This time, however, the disappearance wasn't a solo event. The man who saw it, Alton thought his name was Eggers, paced back and forth in front of a small crowd that began to grow from all the commotion. "He was there, just looking off toward the food stores, and something caught his eye. Must have, because wasn't nobody over at the food store, since the meeting isn't till later tonight. Anyway," the man continued, his floppy-brimmed hat squeezed tight in both hands, "I was watching him. He was kind of walking fast toward the stores, but then he went gone." Eggers stopped and looked up at Herman as if waiting for approval to continue. The lines on his forehead looked like canyons in the permanent dying sunlight, the creases filled with dirt and sand. "What do you mean, gone? He went behind the building or something?" Herman asked. The man crumpled his hat into a polyester lump and turned his gaze to the millions of sparkling grains below his shoes. "No, what I mean is... Oh, hell, he just disappeared. He poofed," Eggers said, throwing both arms out in a cartoonish mock billow of smoke. Alton looked over at Herman, who stared back and exhaled roughly through his nose. He nodded and told the small assembly before him to stay put and for Eggers and another man to gather up the remaining souls. With this new development, the food rations meeting would have to wait. Between the silver orbs and Toby's vanishing, Alton and Herman felt like they had a few more pieces of the puzzle. With any luck, the pending meet-up might shake a few more loose as well. A short time later, the group amassed on the lead-shed shady porch, sweating in place as a few stragglers made their way in next to their neighbors. The crowd reacted to the impromptu meeting with confused murmurs and a bit of belly-aching. Alton, Herman, and Eggers stood in front of the assembly. Herman cleared his throat and spoke up first, which Alton was glad for, since still some of these people didn't know him as well, and by proxy he assumed may not have fully trusted what he'd have to say. Herman shushed the crowd, brought everyone to order, and introduced Alton and Eggers to the rest of the men who weren't yet acquainted. Eggers gave a quick account of what he saw earlier. Alton began sweating despite the heat. Having all those scared and disoriented people looking up at him felt worse than any stupid speech he had the displeasure of giving in school. Herman handed the stage over to Alton. Alton cleared his dry, scratchy throat. "Toby's vanishing, and all the others disappearing. Well, we think, Herman and I think, that it's probably all connected to how we all got here. And what here actually is."
"Bullshit."
Someone from the back cursed loudly in a sarcastic drawl.
"Now just hold on a second and let the man finish,"
Herman said to the throng of folks in front of him. The wind picked up as the crowd quieted down again. Alton shielded his eyes from the glare of the erratically setting sun and continued. "Look, I'm not trying to incite anything here. We're all confused and looking for answers. There is a reason we all showed up here. It couldn't have been by chance."
"We've already discussed all this,"
an impatient voice shouted from the crowd. This was met with various degrees of yeah and shh as Herman raised his hand to focus everyone again. In the distance, a steady hum slowly grew. At the behest of the crowd's impatience, Alton pressed on. "I have seen, Herman as well, small drone-like crafts flying around. I don't see them often, but they are unmistakable when they appear. They're about the size of a basketball, smooth and silver-like. No wings or propellers that I can tell," he said, as the humming became louder. "Any time we see one, though, it's only for a few seconds and it zooms away. Faster than any flying thing I've ever seen, anyway. We think Toby may have found one before he disappeared." The crowd erupted in conversation as Alton concluded. The group palavered with each other mostly, but a few men strained to move forward through the small sea of people, headed towards the front like trout trying to swim upstream.
"I've seen them too,"
One man yelled at the trio of speakers as he reached the edge of the crowd.
"I saw it when Marcus disappeared some 6 months ago. Didn't really think anything of it till you mentioned it just now. Didn't really feel too out of place with all the other weird things going on here."
Even as the crowd increased its raucous volume, the humming from earlier seemed to grow louder, closer. Herman was doing his best impression of a schoolteacher trying to corral the unruly body before him, but failing. The two trout had finally made their way up to the porch, but hearing them was difficult over all the muddled conversation. Alton put his hands on his hips and closed his eyes, regretting even bringing up the drone topic. These people couldn't get on the same page unless it involved food and water. A small skirmish broke out, a shoving match toward the back of the crowd. By then, the humming grew so loud it sounded like a million giant cicadas in the heat of a Nebraska summer. Their bickering ceased and they covered their ears, falling to their knees in the heat-trapped sand as the sound crippled any reasonable thought. When Alton was able to look up again, and when his head didn't feel like it was wrapped in tinfoil then stuffed into a microwave, 3 of the silver orb drones hovered above the now silent crowd. Hanson stood up first and slowly walked toward the floating silver mass as if drawn to it. He raised his hand and reached out to touch it. The orb scooted back, perhaps a bit apprehensive of its human counterpart, then produced a small cylinder the size of a permanent marker and blasted out a neon green light. The light beam hit Hanson near the bottom of his sternum, absorbing into him until he began to glow the same vibrant green as the laser. Alton watched from his knees, mouth agape, as seconds later the green aura dissipated, and Hanson became an ashy outline of his former self. The ashes broke up in a silent flurry of dirty flakes before evaporating into the faux sunset. The crowd snapped out of its bewildered trance. Herman ran toward the offending orb, a scream choked out of his throat, guttural yet falsetto. One of the strangest things Alton had ever heard. Gooseflesh broke out all over his skin. He tried to reach out and grab Herman's shoulder as he ran past, tried to stop him, but his arms felt suspended like they were stuck in a mud bog. The orb rotated toward Herman and energized its cylinder as he sprinted at it. The same green laser struck him in the chest. Just as before, Herman's body started to glow, turned to ash, then disappeared. The remaining 2 orbs produced identical cylinders and started emitting their neon green beams into the crowd. Eyes blinking, Alton watched on as more and more men began to turn to ash and vanish. Some ran for cover. Some were blasted down as they fled, and a few had made it into the lead shed and other surrounding buildings. Alton's feet felt encased in cement. He couldn't move as he watched the scene unfold. As others turned to ash around him, he held his breath, befuddled he hadn't yet perished. The orbs began producing a second cylinder that emitted a steady orange beam instead. These beams bore into the wood and concrete buildings like a plasma torch into aluminum. Alton heard more screams as an orb finally crashed through the lead shed, the orange laser compromising the structural integrity of the building, and dispatched everyone inside. Alton trudged through the loose sand, dodging the beams when they appeared. Being one of the last to run saved him from seeking shelter inside the buildings penetrated by the orbs, but it had also left him without a place to hide. Running, Alton tried putting distance between himself and the orbs, playing a numbers game with only 3 death machines versus what was left of an entire population. Short of breath, he put his hands on his knees and tried to gather himself once he reached the last building in their settlement. He didn't bother with the door since it was one of the buildings no one seemed to be able to access. By now, the artificial sun had set, not altering the permanent auburn sky other than decreasing its vibrant hue by a shade or two. Alton's shirt looked like he had gone swimming in it, A stitch had formed in the upper right side of his chest as he again tried to regulate his breathing. The screams had died down, and he wondered who was left. Was anyone left? As Alton looked up, he was greeted by one of the silver orbs, its deathly laser at the ready. The smallest tinge of bright green energized at the tip of the cylinder, as from behind him he heard the frantic cries of Timothy, the group's record keeper. Another of the orbs trailed Timothy, that same familiar green glow blasting out of the cylinder, striking Timothy in the back as he passed in front of Alton. Alton prepared to meet his own fate as the first orb emitted its laser when the beam intended to cease his life bore into the orb that vaporized Timothy instead. Friendly fire. The air began to smell acrid as the laser bounced off the second orb and back into its counterpart. Alton immediately recalled a welding course as part of a shop class in middle school. That same burning smell from those few days of arc welding came flooding back, and that metallic odor was the last thing he thought about before the explosion occurred. He didn't see it happen, but the burst knocked him several feet back into the sand. He lay there trying to pick himself up off the ground, waiting for the ringing in his ears to go away, and imagined the two orbs unwittingly destroying each other as Timothy streaked past. The explosion also created a hole in the building's facade large enough for Alton to crawl through. Little tendrils of smoke drifted from the wood destroyed by the blast. The incident also burned half of the hair off his head, but he was glad to be alive and able to finally get away from the melee outside. Hiding from the last orb sure felt more doable. Alton edged forward. The room beyond the charred siding led to a dark hallway that ended at another door, slightly ajar. Faint light spilled from the opening, light that looked like it came from an actual electrical source. Alton pulled the door back, took a step forward, and tripped over a body below him. He halted his fall on a desk full of computers. Each monitor showed a different portion of their camp. He recognized the remnants of the lead shed along with the food store. 3 bigger monitors sat higher up. 2 of the 3 had no feed, just a white fuzzy picture of a television station that had long since signed off. The last monitor showed an aerial view of the camp, zooming in and out at the alleyways and buildings.
"Shut it down,"
a voice gurgled out from below. At first, Alton thought the inert body he tripped over had come back to life. And why not? Stranger things, especially in this place, have happened. But next to the body he had stumbled over lay another man. In the light cast from the monitors, Alton could make out that both men wore military fatigues stained with the darkly sick gore that used to be their insides. The man he tripped over, the dead man, still had a pistol loosely gripped in his right hand. The other man clung to his stomach as he struggled to lift his head. To that man's left, another pistol.
"The red switch. Shut it,"
the man began before settling into a fit of wet-sounding coughs.
"You need push the button."
On the desk underneath the monitor sat a rectangular pad akin to an ancient sound mixer. In the middle, a bright red kill switch button bloomed from the otherwise black and gray board. It was flanked by 2 large joysticks. Alton hovered his hand over it and looked back at the soldier giving the orders. He acknowledged Alton with a strained nod, and Alton slammed the button down. A series of small clicks erupted from the board, and the remaining large monitor went fuzzy. "What in the blue hell is going on here?" Alton asked, kneeling to get a better look at the soldier. Alton took a basic first aid class once, but the soldier's wounds were beyond his capabilities of repair. Project Red Arrow, the fatigued man said between coughs. With his free hand, he motioned to a thick binder next to the monitors. No one was supposed to die. Stevenson just went crazy, he managed, now waving his hand at the dead man. Orders were to monitor the group, use the technology to observe. Stevenson started making people disappear, but no one realized it until it was too late. He continued until he started wheezing. On the remaining broadcasting monitors, 3 survivors slowly crawled out of the water store building. Alton's eyes adjusted to the electronic light as he thumbed through the binder on the desk. Its cover bore the familiar stars and stripes of the American flag, and printed below that, Project Red Arrow, property of the United States Army. The first few pages looked like they were written in hieroglyphics, or Chinese logograms from a takeout menu. The sheets following contained what looked like autopsy photos of the strangest-looking animal Alton had ever seen. The thing's eyes were large and black, chestnut-shaped, its skin smooth and shiny. Below that photo was a large diagram of a silver basketball-sized orb. "What is all this?" Alton asked, as much to himself as to the soldier, and continued flipping through the pages. He couldn't take his eyes off the material inside the binder. He felt lost. It was like a force had sucked him into yet another strange world. After the autopsy photographs, each new page contained a headshot of people Alton recognized from the camp. Each had a brief medical synopsis, familial history, and each was assigned a 3-digit number. Then he turned to the page that contained his headshot, smiling, staring right back up at him. Toward the back, he found the project outline. It read, "Red Arrow, Mission Directive, by order of General Miller, Army. Observe and report findings on subjects 001 through 032. Use of Red Arrow technologies, subset and reference Arrow Pig Project for further guidelines, authorized on subjects only. Apply findings to unit psychologist stress strategies on combat and group cohesion. Transfer any rogue subjects." Alton closed the binder, his head now swimming with more questions than his mind could comprehend. He knelt again beside the dying soldier. His breaths came in labored huffs. "How do we stop this? How do we get out of here? How do we get home?" Alton asked, his mouth inches from the soldier's ear. Alton's vision slipped in and out of focus. His arms trembled. The soldier's mouth opened and closed like a dying bird, but no sound came out. He coughed up a mucus-like red mass that ran down the side of his sweat-plastered cheeks. "Page 19, he choked out. Alton popped back up to his feet and retrieved the binder again. The pages became greasy with sweat as he frantically flipped to the correct section. Halfway down page 19, a row of foreign symbols created a box, and below the box in English, a set of steps for releasing some sort of electrical magnetic field boundary. It took nearly 10 minutes to find the correct switches and conductors on the mixer board below the monitors, as Alton read and reread the guide to shutting down the project. After a few hiccups, he found the correct sequence and hit the big red button once more. All around him, the air started to feel electrically charged, like static synapses firing off in random directions. A loud hum and pop filled the room, then disappeared as fast as it had occurred. Is that it? Are the boundaries gone? Alton asked, looking down at the soldier. The soldier's motionless face stared back like an old porcelain doll. Alton bent down and placed his ear above the man's mouth. Nothing. He had passed while Alton shut the system down. Better him than me, Alton thought, as he grabbed the binder and headed back toward the smoldering exit. Outside, the remaining members of the little group meandered around like zombies. Alton recognized Gary, a young 20-something also part of the labor force, leaning up against a pile of debris, an inanimate silver orb lay on its side next to him.
They're mostly dead, or vaporized, or whatever happened to them. But they're gone. Not here,
he said, eyeing the orb. The three other empty-eyed souls wandered over to him after he spoke.
Hey,
Alton called out to the gathering men, holding the army binder above his head as he made his way over to them. You are not going to believe this shit. They decided to walk. Walk until they either ended up back where they started like before, or walk until they found someplace else with the boundaries now hopefully down. That thinking paid off an hour later when they crested a clay-colored cliff high above a small city. Looking down, it reminded Alton of the model buildings he used to assemble as a kid for his train set. Alton's legs, ravished with exhaustion, gave out and he fell to his knees on the dusty rock. He heard one of the men behind him start to sob. Another began to laugh. They remained there, in sporadic silence, looking down at the sweet side of civilization. Alton wanted so badly to descend from the cliff, to go running into the people and cars and lights below. But they stayed put, enjoying the view. The view that meant they were finally free of the maddening prison that had ensnared them for so long. The wind picked up and carried with it a steady hum. The hum grew, quickly and loudly, like an electrical storm swallowing all the energy in its path. The real, actual sun hung high in the atmosphere behind the men, getting ready to let the world know it would soon be lunchtime. That hot sun, that blinding sun, the giver of life. The bright rays starting to turn Alton's pale skin red. Those bright rays baking the dirt and sand underneath their knees. Those bright rays reflecting off hundreds of basketball-sized silver orbs behind them. And that was Sunshine and Bullets by author A.W. Mason. A good reminder that surveillance and control often come disguised as protection and observation. But you knew that already, didn't you? Again, just a reminder. A little about the author. A.W. Mason lives in Florida with his cats Wallace and Belle, retired extreme parkour artists who look so dapper in their little helmets and knee pads. He enjoys all the nachos, getting lost in the woods, and naps. Mason has published several books, including A Haunt of Travels, The Cleanup Crew, The Scamperin', co-authored with Alana K. Drex, and Judy Martin's Final Curtain Call. His short stories have appeared in various anthologies. Hey, thanks, A.W., and thank you, Velox Books. Well, the Crimson Hour's over, and you know what that means. Things are about to get dark around here. So thanks as always for joining me tonight, y'all. Hey, do me a favor. Drop a like or a follow wherever you're listening. And if the spirit moves you, I sure could use some reviews. And don't forget to subscribe. Meanwhile, I'll see you all next week at the same place and at the same time. The Crimson Hour. Good night, y'all.